Just when you think things can't get any worse at Celtic at the minute, they do. And that's an understatement. They have got far worse after I woke up this morning and saw this article. And the worst part about it is, this wasn't a scheduled video today. This wasn't meant to be what I was doing. In fact, I was meant to be talking about an entirely different negative situation, the one involving Dies and Maeda, which surfaced yesterday. But we'll put that in the back burner for now. That goes to tomorrow. We'll cover that then. Just letting you know, there's another negative video coming. And I was hoping this weekend we could just move on from the negativity and we could move on from moaning for a wee bit until maybe at least we heard something significant. And we have heard something significant today, and it's this article which surfaced by The Sun this morning. And before we even talk about it, I just want to make one thing crystal clear. Yes, I know it's The Sun, right? They're scumbags. I detest The Sun as much as you watching this video detest The Sun. I hate sourcing them, I hate citing them, I hate using them on any sort of level. I just hate The Sun. However, we have arrived at a point as Celtic supporters where we sadly need to use them, because just like what happened in the COVID years, they are the ones that the Celtic board trickle their information to. Their cronies and their pals and their minions that work at the Sun newspaper is where they decide to put their information rather than giving it as first hand. Rather than speaking up for themselves and giving us word through their own mouth, they, in a cowardly fashion, decide to trickle their information into members of the MSM. And instead of facing the music, they'd rather do that. It means that they don't need to take the brunt of things. But if you've looked at the online reaction to this story this morning, oh, they're taking the brunt of things, as they should. So, I know that some people will look at this and they'll go, how can we trust it? It's The Sun. This is not the first time. And if you're wise enough to that, if you're smart enough to know that, you'll know that this probably harbours a lot of truth in it. You've obviously got to take things with a pinch of salt sometimes. And the insiders who are being referenced here, we have no idea who they are. But after what happened towards the end of the COVID season, I'd be inclined to believe that history is repeating itself right now. It was happening with The Sun back then. It's happening again now. This is the way of the Celtic board trying to communicate with us supporters rather than doing it in the way that they should. They'll sit there and they'll sit in silence, and instead they'll give us this. So, yeah, this very concerning article has dropped this morning, which it's like I would never have expected anything like this. I know it's bad at the minute, but this has taken it to another level. And the questions that have been asked of the Celtic board in recent days are only going to be amplified by Celtic supporters over the next couple of days. This article is a disaster of a piece which paints Celtic in all the wrong lights. You know, this is horrendous stuff to read. And they've effectively hung Brendan Rodgers out to dry. In fact, before I even get into reading any of the quotes, this article is essentially the Celtic board saying, we're not at fault for what's going on here. It's Brendan Rodgers. And I think one of the quotes that we're going to get into actually says that Brendan Rodgers is a man who's trying to tear Celtic apart. That is the angle they're going with. No accountability, no acceptance of poor running of a club, poor business. No, let's push Brendan Rodgers out there and let's blame him. Everybody's got an opinion of Brendan Rodgers at the minute. The football hasn't been great, the tactics have been backwards, and there's a real question over whether or not that will change. And that's brought Brendan Rodgers into some scrutiny. And rightfully so. You know, the football's not been good enough, the football's been bland, it's been boring to watch. You actually worry if Celtic have the ability to score a goal anymore. But this is a position that no manager should find themselves in, no matter your opinion of them. And I know some people have a vendetta against Brendan Rodgers. Some people who masked it over the last year for whatever sake are now bringing it back out because they feel like there's a time and place to do it. No matter what your opinion is of Brendan Rodgers as a football manager, as a guy, whatever, nobody should be put into this position. No Celtic manager. Neil Lennon shouldn't have been put into this position. Ange Postecoglou would never have been brought into this position. He might have if he stayed around long enough, because I'm starting to think that might have been the case. But nobody, no matter what your opinion of the man is, this is ridiculous. And we've not even got started on reading the article, so we should probably do that. So The Sun have wrote this headline that Celtic insiders fear that Brendan Rodgers is trying to engineer his way out amid a split with the board over summer transfers. There's concerns that he could walk away before the end of his contract. And we'll talk about that in a moment, because at this point I think we wouldn't be surprised, or we wouldn't blame the guy if he did. But the article goes on to say that Celtic insiders believe that Brendan Rodgers wants out of Celtic Park after a split over summer signings, and there's concerns that he has already begun to engineer his exit. And this obviously comes after months of saying he'll see out the 3 years, he's still happy at the club, he would be here till the end of that contract. And then obviously that's been brought into question over these last few weeks. He hasn't been backed properly. We haven't made the signings that we were due to make. The squad has regressed more than anything. And it's created this sort of narrative amongst the Celtic supporters that if Brendan Rodgers was to walk, I think he'd walk with most fans' best wishes. In fact, I think that there's a narrative that's emerged that Brendan Rodgers could ultimately enhance his legacy as a Celtic manager should he walk again. And that might not apply to everybody. Some people might treat it with the same contempt that they treated him walking away the first time. But I think this time there's a lot more sympathy towards his situation. And him walking away from the club would kind of act like a message, like a sort of message to the Celtic board that yous can't keep getting away with this. I'm not putting up with your shite. Fuck off. And I think that some Celtic fans really like the idea of that. And that's why I'm saying I think for some, it would enhance his legacy. Instead of sitting there in press conferences acting like things are hunky-dory, really send a message to them. Really give them food for thought. And maybe force some sort of deep critical thinking within the board that brings forward change. However, the most ambitious part about that is to think that the Celtic board actually would like to change. So this is where the article begins to get interesting. And dare I say, quite excruciating. An excruciating read, because it is so damning of everything that's wrong at Celtic right now, and everything that has us supporters moaning and concerned about the actual health of Celtic Football Club. The things that we've been talking about on repeat for the last week. And I use the word moaning not in a negative way. We have the right to moan. We are entitled to moan about this. And yes, I'm using that word entitled. I know that Peter Lawwell might call us entitled Neds, but we are entitled to moan about the state of our club right now, because it is deeply, deeply concerning, and these quotes back all of that up. These are the things that a very small minority still of the supporter are hiding themselves under the covers from, pretending that everything's okay. You cannot read an article like this, even though it's up for question how much of it is legitimate and how much of it is accurate. You cannot look at articles like this and pretend that the health of Celtic Football Club right now is good. It's not. We are bleeding. We are on life support, it feels like. When it comes to a boardroom level and being run as a football club, we are on life support. Aye, things might be fine in the pitch. We're top of the league. We haven't conceded a goal. Good. Bare minimum stuff for Celtic. Other than that, we are in trouble. And this article does not help paint the picture any better. So I will read it verbatim, and then we'll dissect it and we'll talk about it, because I can't believe some of the stuff that I've had to read this morning. It is just insane. The insider from Celtic, who's apparently leaked this information to the Sun, says that senior figures inside the club believe that Rodgers is engineering his exit. What he's said in public has torn the club apart. On and off the record discussions are creating division throughout the club. He's the only manager in the club's history who has repeatedly questioned things. It's been the same board, same management, and same strategy. The club have spent tens of millions. When Brendan came back, he agreed to the club's strategy. There are now people inside the club who are deeply unhappy with his words, and to make matters worse, these issues appear to be seeping into the performance of the team. It's like Groundhog Day again. So that's the article. Those are the quotes. And I just can't believe what I'm reading. So apparently Brendan Rodgers is the one who has torn the club apart. Apparently he's the one that's torn the club apart. His words have apparently worsened the situation and made things worse. And I don't know if I'm missing something, but I don't know what part of what Brendan Rodgers says has torn the club apart. Because at times I think Brendan Rodgers is actually, dare I say, being too nice and being too ignorant towards the problems. I love the guy. You all know that. And I don't need to repeat myself when I say that I'm one of Brendan Rodgers' biggest fans. But there has been times where he's sat at press conferences and he's backed this Celtic board, and we've been like, that's not what you should be saying. You should be coming out and taking them to task. You know, the other week he was sat there saying that Dermot Desmond bleeds green and white and that the Celtic board deeply care about this club. So what part of those words have torn the club apart? You know, that's what I'm really confused at. Whoever this insider is that is at whatever level of the club and knows these higher up figures, what part of the words that he's said has torn the club apart? And this is coming apparently from higher ups. You know, this is a source that's talking from what the higher ups are saying. He's the only manager in the club's history who's repeatedly questioned things. No, he's not. And let's focus on the last 20 years since Peter Lawwell has rose to power at Celtic under the Dermot Desmond ownership, I should say. He's not. Martin O'Neill publicly questioned Peter Lawwell and the Celtic hierarchy before his departure in 2005. Neil Lennon publicly questioned aspects of how the club was being run, even though he was under scrutiny. Ange Postecoglou has been out in press conferences questioning how the club has been run at certain points. Brendan Rodgers is not the first manager who has repeatedly questioned things. And I think that Brendan Rodgers has probably been, as I've said, a little bit light on them at times. All he's done is repeated the fact that he needed improvement in the squad. And if that's the kind of thing that the Celtic board are picking up problems with, I mean, we all know this, it's hardly breaking news, it all but reinforces the point, they are not fit to run a football club, in the slightest. If they have no legitimate concerns about what the playing squad was looking like heading into this season, into the Champions League qualifiers, and they were unhappy with Brendan Rodgers publicly asking for more money to spend and more improvements to the squad, they are not fit for purpose, and they should be removed from their position of power at the club immediately. And you know what I'm going to say next about this line, about being the only manager who's apparently questioned things? It is the admission that we all were waiting on. It's the answer to the question that we all knew the answer to. Do the board want a yes man in that position? Of course they do. And we've always known that. But this is the line that confirms it all. That is so deeply alarming and so deeply concerning. If Brendan Rodgers were to walk tomorrow, hypothetically, Christ, let's forget about him walking prematurely. Let's just think about the end of the season. If Brendan Rodgers walks at the end of the season, who's next? What yes man are the board going to employ? Are we going to have Sean Maloney in charge of Celtic? Are we going to gift a job to somebody who's deeply unqualified just because they'll be happy to work under the horrible conditions that the Celtic board apply to them? Is that what's going to happen? This is scary. You know that? I'm not going to lie. That is a horrifying quote. They don't like a manager questioning things. What's the point? What is the point? It is the admission that this club, and this board I should say, have not tried to hide all along. They're happy with standing still, and as long as they're there, we will stand still. Not one member of the Celtic board has spoke publicly about any of this. Not one member of the Celtic hierarchy has spoke publicly about any of the concerns at the club right now. Not one statement from the club in response to numerous fan statements has been made, and not one member of that Celtic board has put their name to this cowardly article, and they have hung the manager out to dry and used him as the apparent reason for everything that's going wrong at Celtic Football Club right now, when the truth of the matter is, and the fact of all facts is, that those are the guys, Michael Nicholson, Peter Lawwell, Dermot Desmond and Chris Mackay, those are the guys who are the very rot at Celtic Football Club. They have rotted this club to the point where fans have to ask these questions and have to speak so negatively, and not one of them has come forward and said anything publicly because they are cowards. It does beg the question, should Brendan Rodgers walk? After an article like that, he has to be seeing this. He's not dumb. He's not an idiot. He's got social media. He's got a phone. He will have seen this article this morning. The question is what comes next with him. My only concern is that Brendan Rodgers speaks at his next press conference and says, you can't believe everything you see. It's nonsense. Everything's fine. My relationship's okay with the board. We know that your relationship with the board is not okay. And I don't think there's any amount of words that could convince me that that relationship is ready to be mended. And it will all be backed when Brendan Rodgers isn't here next season. So there's no point in Brendan Rodgers sitting up in a press conference and lying through his teeth to us. And if he does that, then I don't know how I'll react. I think I'll be pretty let down. I'm not calling for the man to walk because I love him, and I would love him to stay here to the end of the season. I'd love him to finish off his Celtic legacy with more trophies, with another league title, and to fondly remember him for those sorts of memories. But this article does ask the question, why should he stay? If they are hanging him out to dry publicly, why should he stay now? He doesn't owe anything to this club anymore, if that's the way he's been treated. And I say it again, no matter your opinions of Brendan Rodgers, no matter what you think of his style of football and what's happening so far this season on the pitch, there is an element here where the guy deserves a form of justice, it feels like. They're hanging him out to dry and trying to use him as the fall guy, and I will not buy it. And I don't think many of us will. But I don't think you should let your personal grievances get in the way to starting to align yourself with what the board are saying. Brendan Rodgers isn't tearing this club apart. The ones in the suits and the ties that sit in their executive chair on their $1 million paychecks are the ones tearing the club apart. They do not give a shit about us. They never have, and they never will. Whereas Brendan Rodgers, he does. Some of you might not believe it. He does. He deeply cares about this football club. He deeply cares about our supporters. And the other ones don't. So just think about that. It's a joke. All of it. Every single part of it. It's an excruciating read. It's a concerning read. And it's one that we need to hear answers about soon. The clock is ticking for this Celtic board. Every day that goes by without a public acknowledgement of these problems is further evidence that they should be chased from this football club. I've accepted that I will probably never be invited back to any daft fan media press conferences while they're the guys running the club, and it's something I would love to return doing one day. I've accepted that I'm probably not on any invite lists anytime soon. I've not minced my words about these guys this past week, and I will continue to talk in that fashion about them. They are not fit for purpose, and they are killing my football club. And I want them gone.